So yes, welcome to the colleges, hosted in partnership with the Bristol Law Society, actually, free virtual panel event. And this is all about securing legal work experience. It's a question we get asked an awful lot. And we've really tried to bring together a panel of lots of diverse and different experiences of three successful lawyers who can share their experiences with them, both your own personal experiences, I hope, but also those that you see in the sector and your expertise in the sector around how to get work experience and hopefully qualifying work experience as well. So my name is Alice Payne. I head up the student recruitment and marketing at the college. I've been at the college 4 years. And I also lead on our equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we're really keen that all of our panel events very much are inclusive. As such, I've got closed captions on. Also, there's a transcript and you will receive the recording afterwards as well. So hopefully you should be able to have full access to the webinar. If there's anything that's not working for you, just pop it in the chat and I'll see if I can help. All right. So the webinar lasts a maximum of an hour, hour 15, depending on how many questions we have. And thank you so much for submitting all your questions to us, because we have a good idea of who hopefully most of you are, and also what you're hoping to get out of today. So we'll try and steer the conversation to answer all those questions that you have submitted for us. But first of all, I'm just going to let the panel introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about perhaps what they're doing now in the legal sector and their journey to date in their career. So who would like to go first? Egbe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Egbe Manton. I am a in-house lawyer at the moment, so I work for BP. I also run an organisation called Inspire Law Global, which helps students to obtain training contracts. My journey wasn't easy. I achieved a 2-2 at my university and wasn't expecting it, so I wasn't very much on the back foot. I ended up doing lots of work experience to try and get my work experience up, and so that law firms could see past the 2-2. And then I ended up qualifying into Norton Rose Fulbright, and then it went in-house. So from going from a real low to a real high. So yeah, hopefully I can share some knowledge about how I did that during the session.
Thank you. Charlotte.
Hi everyone, my name's Charlotte. I'm an employment lawyer at British Airways, also working in-house. I trained at a regional firm called JMW up in Manchester, then moved to London upon qualification. Before I did my training contract, I'd worked in-house at a facilities management company doing employment law, and before that did some legal aid work in the discrimination sphere. My first legal job was in BLM in the motor recoveries and insurance department. Then whilst I was studying, I did work experience at my university's legal advice centre, that was Queen Mary, and also did some work experience at the Guardian newspaper.
Thank you. And Stuart?
I'm Stuart, and I'm the current president of the Bristol Law Society, and the first one that is a chartered legal executive as opposed to solicitor. So I, very similar to Egbe, came out of my law degree with a 2-2. A long potted story about how my first attempt at a career was as a professional musician and how that all went peak-tong and all became my backup plan. And I got a 2-2 because I also had to try and get 30 hours a week work in alongside doing a full-time uni course. So that kind of put me on the back foot, much like Egbe said, and then found myself falling into litigation, which I now practice. My fiance says that I'm a professional arguer, is how she describes it to anyone who asks what I do, and now do business disputes and any kind of litigation that's not centered around things like injuries. If it's a business dispute or a fight about money or property or land, I tend to look at that quite a broad church. I did my training in that with Lyons Davidson in Bristol. I then moved in-house to help an insurance company start up their own in-house law firm. And after a couple of years of doing that, moved back into private practice with a firm called MW Solicitors that was then bought out by Taylor Rose in 2020. And I've now transitioned into their self-employed consultant scheme, where instead of being paid a salary, I pay a small percentage to the firm to cover their insurance costs and things, and using all of their systems and what have you, and I essentially eat what I kill on fees and things with clients. So very much a return to the original kind of iteration of solicitors firms, where it was all down to individual partners trying to see what work they could get through, what they could charge, and your earnings go up or down according to how good you are.
Thank you. Oh, very different experiences and journeys. Thank you for sharing those. So if anyone has any questions for the panels we go through, please pop them in the chat, and I'll try and pick them up as we go along. We're going to start, obviously we've got a lot of undergraduates and possibly those who are still studying with us today. So we're going to start right at the beginning, I guess, and just think a little bit about how to get that very first placement. That's the first part, legal work experience, that a student is looking for. So maybe Stuart, start with yourself. What would your advice be for someone who's just looking to start off at the very first moment?
I think the best advice I can give is to be optimistic but realistic. I found that, coming into the working world with a 2-2, my university was University of Gloucestershire, so it wasn't Russell Group or anything. I kind of had to work out very quickly which firms it would be a waste of time applying to, because their criteria were set differently. And that doesn't mean that I compromised my ambitions long term. It just meant that I viewed it as I've got more steps to take to catch up with my peer group. So I needed to look at smaller firms. First of all, look at, what was I going to do first? I mean, so my first job out of education was, or my first legal job, shall I say, out of education was doing remortgage time, that if I could get some experience with a firm, that would then lead to the next and the next and the next. And so I had to view it very much as a stepping stones approach. And I think saying to people, look, don't get disheartened because you can't walk straight into your dream job. Sit down, plan a map as to how you get
Yeah, I'm afraid you're just cutting out just a bit. I don't know whether that's just for me. Is that for anyone else?
What you need to get first. Well, first of all, you need to get, and that'll lead to the next one, the next one.
Stuart, you're cutting in and out. I'm just going to go to a couple of the other panelists. I don't know whether there's anything we can do about that, but I heard you perfectly as it was before we started the webinar. And the moment we started, I think it made it a little bit tricky. So perhaps see whether we can come back to you in a moment. Charlotte, in terms of your advice, what was your very first kind of work experience placement that you found?
So in terms of whilst I was studying, it was at my university's law centre. So at Queen Mary, they had kind of an in-house law centre. So I volunteered there. So I guess if you're a student, that would probably be my first port of call, is if you're aware of any local legal advice centres or citizens advice, they're normally looking for volunteers. So I think that's a good exposure just to get into the office environment and providing legal advice on to people that really, really need it, and coming to you for support. And also those centres normally have support from law firms, so it's a good opportunity to network as well. I think looking at things like, if you are from the LGBT plus background, there's a lot of networks available for LGBT plus lawyers that you could join. So I went to one, the Interlaw Diversity Forum, and met there the head of legal at The Guardian, and that work experience I got through just asking her, do you have any work experience available? And it was a very quick conversation, and not all work experience opportunities are going to come up that easily, but you just have to try your luck, I think, with some of these things. And generally people do want to help you up the ladder if they can. My first actual paid employment in law was not in an area that I would generally have considered. So insurance and motor recoveries, I still to this day don't drive, so I don't think I was very good at it, but I took that job purely to get a legal job, because when I started to look, it was so difficult to actually get on the ladder without the experience. So I would say be open-minded to the area of law initially, because I think it's just getting that step on the ladder, and actually once you get that experience, then you can move into other fields, and a lot of firms will have various departments, so there might even be opportunities to move internally.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Egbe?
I mean, Charlotte touched on so many good points. I think the easiest one, if you are at university, I agree with her, is the law, any kind of law societies, sorry, law advice clinics, or any type of units that are attached to your university. I think is an easy win. It's one that you can get involved in. But if you don't have that, I would say also there's two other things that I would be thinking about. The first is, we've touched on, how you can do it straight from a legal standpoint. But the way that I kind of did it was to look at other sectors that have transferable skills to the legal sector and use that route. So rather than going out and getting a paralegal role, because at the time when I was coming out of university, that was quite difficult, I also then thought about what other careers are quite close. And for me, it was more of a compliance-based role or a corporate secretariat, so group secretary type assistant roles, because all of them kind of link back to the legal sector. So, for example, if you're an assistant in a group secretary sense in-house, then you're drafting documents, you're getting things signed off, you're doing minutes. So all of the type of things that you would be doing as, for example, a corporate solicitor, those kind of foundation elements are also within those careers. So if there's any other type of career that you think, actually, I could do some work experience in and that would be transferable, that's also helpful. And one thing that I don't think students should overlook is also LinkedIn. I get quite a few LinkedIn requests, students asking to shadow individuals. And what I would say is, LinkedIn is one of the best tools ever for you to be able to connect one-on-one with people who are very experienced in the legal field. Rob, let me just caution this. So I wouldn't say send thousands of DMs asking for work experience, because that is a nightmare. But what you could do is, if there were particular companies that you wanted to work in, or in sectors, for example, maybe the retail sector, like for a BA, or in my sector, in the energy sector, then do your research and then approach the right people in those fields, and be tailored and say, look, I've done the research, I've seen what you've done. It would be great, even if it was just for a day, to shadow you, just so I can understand kind of what you do in person. Or is it okay for us to have a Zoom and we can talk about your role? So just trying to be open and thinking outside the box is always helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Stuart, we'll come back to you. Apologies, we couldn't quite hear you last time, so we'll try again.
I don't know what happened. My connection just seemed to disappear and everybody went static at the end, and I thought I just sent you all to sleep.
No, you can, by all means, share.
I think my advice was just to plot your route. I was saying that because of the starting point I was at, I couldn't really just kind of jump into the dream firm or the dream job, and just to say to people, don't get disheartened by that. It's a tough career. I've got a couple of friends who are professional actors who said that they deal with less rejection than people applying for training contracts. So, take it for what it is. It's not personal, but also, temper that with a realistic expectation. I knew I couldn't go into a magic circle firm, but I knew if I wanted to work there, I'd have to plot a route that meant going from side to side. And so, starting off with an admin role, moving into, I did remortgage conveyancing to begin with, and it bored me to tears. I then went into litigation, doing small claims stuff, and worked my way up through that. Found that I fell in love with doing civil litigation and enjoy that, and that's what I wanted to stick at. And since then, every move that I have made in my career hasn't just been for the sake of it. It's always been, does it sit with part of the long-term plan? Let's face it, once you start working, you've got 40 odd years to give to the profession until you can collect your state pension, probably longer by the time we'll get round to it. So there's no reason to kind of make decisions based on short-term strategies. Think about the long term. Where do you want to be long term, and plot a route to get there, and don't be disheartened if it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and your first placement can be very small, and it could be, I mean, the word placement's even quite grand, isn't it? It might just be an opportunity to shadow someone for literally a day who is either in a firm or who is in a different sector, but perhaps you know, in a role that's got some kind of link or connection. So we've had a question in the chat, actually. Someone has asked, they're changing from public policy to law, but they're working full time. So most of their work experience opportunities range from a day, a week, to the odd week here or there. How much work experience do you think we should aim to accumulate to help facilitate their move into law? I don't know. Oh, go on. Sorry, Charlotte.
I was just going to say, I think it's about the kind of evidence of commitment. I don't think there's a magic time frame, unless you're doing the SQE and have to get a certain number of hours. But generally, I think if you're moving career, it's about evidencing why you've decided to move career, what draws you to the legal career, and having some work experience to back it up. But also as well, like Egbe touched on earlier, it's about transferable skills. So think if there's anything useful in the public policy role now to what could be useful for law. And also my training contract application, I spoke quite a lot about doing cabin crew and the customer service I learned from that. And actually that is something so vastly different to law, but the application question I asked was about service to clients, and you know, working on a plane with 200 people is very much focused around that. So although it wasn't in an office, it was still really valuable experience.
I'd also say think about how you can sell that as an advantage. You know, when you come to applications and interviews, don't fool yourself into a mindset of saying it's not legal experience, therefore it doesn't matter. Look at it as how does that experience give you an edge over everybody else? And when you sit down and think about it and start writing it out, you actually find there's quite a lot. And it may mean that sometimes you need to get a close friend to do that, because we're British and we're terrible at sort of promoting ourselves. We always play it down. It's kind of built into our DNA. But I think if you look at, by contrast, American culture, it's quite common for you to kind of big up yourself and be your biggest champion. So try and put yourself in that mindset, and you'll probably find that there's some really good selling points there that give you a real advantage. And if you can't get out to do as much work experience as other people, get what you can under your belt, and like I say, try and leverage what you've already got behind you.
I had a couple of questions that came through in the registration for the event, really about if you're not at the right university, you're not at Russell Group University, or perhaps you haven't got a network. And I think there's obviously, there's a message certainly sometimes that we do put out there saying network, and use your university's law society or links. So if you haven't got those two things, that does narrow down your opportunities. So is there anything else around, I guess, either where people are based or what they can do in their hometown that might be ways in which they can get those kind of work experience options? Okay.
So what I would say about, one of the key things, if people take nothing else away today, is that your background or your university should not be a dictator about the opportunities that you're able to get. I had this for a number of years, and it hindered me when really, nowadays a lot of law firms and organizations are actively looking for individuals that don't come from Russell Group. So don't let that stop you. In terms of what you can do in your actual town, or if anything, this is a whole lot easier, because usually, for example, with the Law Society, they have particular groups for what we would call early talent, so people that are either junior lawyers or below. So if you're a student or you're just into your first job, start with the Law Society, because they have some great associations there. But there's also other associations that you can find online that will be great for your particular area. So you can search for it on LinkedIn, you can search for it on Facebook. Like, genuinely, there's quite a few groups that will be local to you. But the onus will be on you to do the work. Nobody's going to sit there and say to you, okay, here are the list of the groups. It's more about, you have to use your own initiative to be able to find them and to really kind of be resilient about it. So there are groups locally, it's just you're going to have to put some work in to find them. And they can seem a little scary and intimidating at first, can't they? I mean, Stuart, we're both in the Bristol area, and there's Bristol Junior Lawyers Division. That sounds quite professional, doesn't it? But they aren't all lawyers who go to the Lawyers Division. I know that sounds like a silly thing to say.
Yeah, and they're people who are with an interest in law, or with a quasi-legal, they might be in the legal department of a company, for example, or things that stand around it. But those are really great ways to get in. And I think networking is one of those things that it's difficult to explain to somebody how to do it. But the thing you've got to get over is you're only going to get better at it by doing it. And it sounds really odd. And I had quite a steep learning curve with this when I went into the consultancy program, because I was kind of used to doing my work, collecting my salary, no problem. And then all of a sudden it was like, right, now I've finished those cases, I've got to go and find some more. And you can't stand on the street saying to people, do you want to sue anybody? Because it's not that kind of product, you know? So I really kind of had to put some effort into getting better at networking. And what I found is a lot of the time it's about who you know and who you get on with. And much like a friendship group, you'll tend to find that there is a natural click you have with some people and not with others. So just turning up to these events, you'll get to know people. And one of the other things that people don't talk about often enough is that, you know, when you start in your legal career, typically you're younger. The people you are networking with are at a similar level to you. And none of you have got any clout in the businesses. But fast forward 10, 15, 20 years, the people you've been friends with because that networking group, or because you found out you both like golf and you started playing a couple of times a year just to keep in touch, all of a sudden they get decision-making power as they go up the ranks as well. And they get to decide where they send their legal business. They get to decide who they want to work with. And if they get on with you and they know you're easy to work with and they've known you for years and they trust you, then that work will come in, and that's where your network will then start to really accelerate your career. It doesn't happen in the early stages very often at all, but don't let that fool you into thinking, well, I won't go to that group because I don't get anything out of it. Just focus on building a network of other professionals that you like and trust and that you can enjoy the company of, because that will make networking enjoyable in its own right. And then the kind of work and the professional advantages will just come as a secondary thing. I think if you go in thinking, what can I get out of this, you're only going to lose.
Thank you. Someone's given us a question about whether they're getting what I guess they're promised from a firm or their employer. And I guess this is about the kind of, we had a couple of questions that people can't afford to work for free, in terms of volunteering when it's somewhere perhaps that they're not based, so they can't afford to go and pay rent somewhere, and getting the right type of experience, or at least legal experience. I don't know, Charlotte, is there anything that you could advise people on those things, just to make sure they're actually getting some valuable experience or getting something back from what they're being offered?
I think being realistic, I mean, I had some work experience opportunities that I had to turn down once I was studying or just graduated, either because they were unpaid or not paid high enough to sustain living in London. So it can be quite frustrating to have to reject an offer because you simply can't afford it. So I think it's managing the time you do have, and if there's anything on the odd weekend or in the evenings, and looking at something that is flexible around your current working pattern. But again, as we mentioned earlier, I think it's also focusing on those transferable skills, and you can evidence on your CV attending webinars and doing the legal research and keeping up to date with the law to show your commitment into the profession. Then there's also things like Grow Mentoring, who provide mentoring services online. So some of that will be around your availability. So to do that in the evenings rather than in the day if you're working.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised mentoring, actually, because I feel like if you don't know anyone in the sector, like some people will have somebody they know in their family network maybe, or someone who they say, oh, they're a solicitor, I can speak to them. But if you don't have someone like that in your network, I guess finding a mentor can make quite a big difference, and someone you can. We're going to move on to kind of talking about applications and interviews. Like, how do you know how you're coming across if you don't have someone that you can bounce those ideas off? Egbe?
I think, following on from that point, I think it's important that you do have somebody. What I would suggest is, if you don't, because that's, sorry, do you mind doing this outside, please? Sorry, both of you outside, thank you. Sorry about that. So if you don't have somebody in your network where you can send them CVs or prep for interviews, there are organisations, just as Charlotte has mentioned, yes, Grow Mentoring is one of them, Aspiring Solicitors, Inspire Law Global, we're another organisation that kind of helps students who don't have that network. And so if you need somebody just to have a look at your application form or your CV, there are organisations that are there to help you so that you don't always have to do that hard work. If you are not able to reach those organisations, then potentially, again, reaching out to individuals on LinkedIn and saying, look, you know, I just need 10 minutes or just someone to kind of help me through this process. You know, would you be free to be able to look at my CV? I think it can be hard because I didn't have anyone in my family who was in any way attached to law, and so I had to, you know, look for organisations. If you are still at uni, there will be your career service that will be able to help with that, or if you're at law school, there'll be a careers element that will be able to help you with that. But it's so important that you're running this past somebody who's in the industry, because they will pick up on things that you won't, not just typos, but, you know, how to restructure things, reframe paragraphs so that you're showcasing your skills and experience in the best way. So the quicker that you're able to have a mentor or someone in your corner, the quicker your journey will be to where you want to get to.
Stuart, do you have anything to add to that in terms of helping people succeed when they get to that point of writing that CV or that application form?
Yeah, I think what everybody says is actually really, really important. You know, it's really useful to have somebody who's been there and done it, or is just a few steps further on, who can help. And don't be afraid to ask for that if you do have a relationship with somebody, or if you've built a relationship with somebody, because by and large, most lawyers are actually quite happy to help. In fact, we're often quite flattered to be asked. But don't just do it by sending a random message through LinkedIn or something. I'd say your best bet is, you know, go to some legal events, start getting involved in them, get talking to people. If you've been to 3 or 4 junior lawyers events and you know people by name to speak to, it's far easier for you to then say, can I ask a massive favour? If you've got time this week, well, we can go for a coffee because I'm doing this application and I just want somebody to have a look through it before I send it. Would you mind? Most of them will be, yeah, absolutely fine, because they know you, they've spoken to you, you're a real person. You're not just a message out of the blue, you know? So do put some stock in building those personal relationships, because you will find there's plenty of people who are more than willing to help. I think sometimes we just get a bit afraid to ask sometimes because we find it intimidating.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Just looking at these, some of these questions people submitted are things about their specific circumstances. So I guess there's one here about single mother, so someone with family commitments, and another person here who's perhaps a later career changer, a more mature career changer. I mean, does this guidance change depending on people's circumstances? How does it vary? Charlotte?
I think with mature people who've had previous careers, I think there's a worry about being older, but actually from when I did my training contract, I found that the people who were maturer, there was someone who had been a DJ and he was 40, so he was a radio DJ and then started his training contract at 40, and actually he brought such a wealth of confidence from doing lots of public speaking and maturity, and I think actually that is valued quite a lot. So if you think a lot of people who have gone to uni and come out straight away with a training contract, they might have never really used a printer, sent an email. There's a lot of basics that they don't know yet, which they can grasp quite quickly, but I think it's making the most of that experience you already have. I would say, in particular for the mature people. I mean, I don't have children, so I'm not sure about the childcare element, but I think we've got 2 panelists who have young children.
Yeah, I've got 2 under 2 at the moment, and that has been a baptism of fire. So I never really appreciated before I had my own just how much skill goes into juggling the household and the calendar and everything else, which my fiance takes care of while I just go and do work, thankfully. But it gives you a real load of skills that you can sell. It comes back to what I said earlier, you know, don't be afraid to big up the skills that you've got with that. You know, by God, if you can juggle 3 kids, get into after school clubs, various sports events to and from school and what have you, then, you know, handling 20, 30 cases is going to be a doddle, you know. So don't be afraid to kind of take those things out of their original context and look for the similarities and the transferable things. And at the end of the day, it makes you human. I know when we're recruiting, everybody's got a law degree, everyone's got their practice qualifications. Those are just the basic entry requirements. What makes me want to sit down and see you an interview is knowing a bit about you as a person. And ultimately, what gets you hired is people thinking, can I see myself enjoying working with this person every single day? That's why the person who's put, in my spare time, I like to read judicial jurisprudence, commentary, and I live and breathe the law, isn't necessarily going to get the interview over somebody who likes to go paragliding on the weekends, because I want to sit down and talk to the paragliding lady. It's things that bring you alive a bit off the page and make you a bit more human. So don't be afraid to embrace that. Just because you've got different circumstances to what you think is the standard applicant, don't see it as a weakness, see it as a strength.
And I guess what you're highlighting is a different culture than perhaps some of the cultures, or the recruitment phase can be so formal, can't it? Like training contract applications, it can feel so official, so scary. And these firms come across so professional and commercial as well, often, that people start thinking that that's the way they are in terms of both the kind of culture and the process. And I suppose what you're highlighting, Stuart, is, I don't know, it's your firm feels quite different. There are different organizations out there with different values, different approaches to work-life balance, to support people.
Yeah, and I think after a while, your perception changes. I think once you get to know the profession a bit more, and your local area, which firms you would enjoy working for, which firms you wouldn't. Whereas I suppose when you're coming at it from the initial entry level, I know I didn't have much of a clue about that. And as far as I was concerned, I wanted to get into a firm that had the most prestigious name in the league table that I was able to get to, because I thought that would mean I would then be more successful and I would then stand a better chance. And there's a certain degree of truth in that. It doesn't hurt to have a magic circle firm on your CV if you're going elsewhere, but it's not the be all and end all. And like I say, you've got 40 odd years to commit to this. If you want to go to the kind of firm that means you have to bill 11 hours a day every day, then that's your choice. If you'd much rather go to a firm that expects sort of 6 billable, 2 non-chargeable, and you can go and put the kids to bed, then that's a lifestyle choice for you. So there's no right or wrong in that. It's just sussing out what you want and not scattergunning the approach and saying to yourself,
what's important for you.
Pick a firm that value you and what you bring as much as what you can get out of them.
Thank you. Egbe?
I mean, I'm slightly biased because I've seen it from both sides, and I think I mean, larger firms do get a bad rep, but what I would say about that is it doesn't have to be your life forever. And some people are just gung ho and want to go down that route, and that's their dream. And kudos to you if you do. I think everyone is different, and the way that I would see it, when you're looking for work experience, similar to what Stuart said, think about the different type of firm that you want to apply to. Because, for example, I'm very happy to admit it, a very driven, goal-orientated individual who is very commercially driven. And so larger law firms were probably more for me at a particular point in my career. Whereas now I couldn't think of anything less or anything worse for me at my time in my life. So the firm that you're probably looking for, or organization you're probably looking for, might change depending on what you're looking for. And so if you want that work-life balance, are certain firms going to work for you? Probably not. But if you want maybe to build those hours, then certain firms will be for you. But you've got to think about, what are your objectives, what are your vision and values? Otherwise, you'll end up at a firm or an in-house organization and you might hate it, and you spend all this time qualifying. So let's just make sure that you're in the right place that you're meant to be. And can I just add one little bit about the single parent? What I would say on that is be kind to yourself, because it is so hard being a parent and juggling study and work. So just if each day is a win, I have to be honest, it's a win, making sure your kids are good, making sure you're still on the road. So just give yourself, all of you, achievable goals that you can reach for each day, and then you'll see the progress if you're consistent. So don't try and think about 5-year goals. Let's just get through the week and see where we get to. That's what I would say as somebody who's constantly in the juggle and not always doing well by it either.
Thank you. You're doing great, Egbe. Everyone does themselves down, don't they? Feel like they're juggling half well as they could if they did focus just on one. Thinking more now about, I guess, applications and interviews and how you stand out. So hopefully it sounds like we've done some research, we've thought about the firms we want to work for, and now we're kind of starting to go through some of these processes, which can, as I said, feel quite formal. I mean, Charlotte, what did you do? How did you stand out in those interviews that you remember that worked well for you? What resonated with the person interviewing you, do you think?
So I think what Egbe was saying about looking at your objectives and the values of the firm is really important. So when I was at university, my university was very much all the advertisements about work experience and training contracts was all catered towards the big law firms, and I naturally followed that path of applying for those ones. But every time I opened the application, I struggled to ever finish them, because actually, if I look back in hindsight, one, they are really long, but two, if I'm really honest with myself, I never thought that route suited me, but I just didn't admit it to myself at the time. So I think asking yourself why you're applying somewhere and actually being aware there are firms or even in-house that is outside of that. So I didn't meet my first in-house lawyer until I actually went in-house. So I think that's a less spoken about area that comes with a lot of benefits. So I would say, in terms of things I've done well in interviews, the key one is understanding yourself, why you went to work there. So when I had my interview for British Airways, there were people who were 2-3 years more senior than me. I was a newly qualified solicitor when I joined, and when I did the interview, I was actually still in my training contract, and BA had never hired a NQ solicitor, especially someone who had never done experience there. Most their solicitors have previously done secondments, but what I think I did well in that interview was building the rapport with the panel, and also why I wanted to work at BA. So for BA, they think it's important for employees to really love the brand, and I, really like aviation, and thought BA would be the perfect place for me, because actually it meshes together two of my key interests, which are aviation and law. So I think that's a good route, and building that rapport with the interview panel.
Thank you. Stuart, and tips to share around successful applications and interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a process that I've honed with this over the years, which has become a bit of a cheat code to this. But what most people don't realise till you've been sat on the other side doing the recruitment for large firms is that most of you get scored on a matrix. And so we'll be asking you the questions, but then afterwards, when you leave the room, we'll go through a sheet. We'll give you scores out of, say, 5 for answers to questions. That'll get fed into a matrix, and then the top applicants will be ranked. Now, a lot of the time, what you don't realise is they've already given you all the answers. Scour the website, understand what the values of that law firm are, what they're advertising themselves as. If they say we pride ourselves on our synergy with our clients by working together with them by doing placements, you've got 5 or 6 keywords there that you've got to say in your answers that will get you to score some points. So it becomes a little bit like, buzzword bingo, where, you get a sheet of words to tick off as the speaker says them when you go to an event for a bit of fun. But you can map out, okay, if I get asked these questions, here are my answers. You'll always be asked similar questions in most interviews, so get some stock standard ones off the internet if they're not supplying them in advance. Revise the kind of things you'll be asked. Can you give me an example of a time where you've dealt with a difficult client or customer? Can you give me a time when you've worked as part of a team? What role did you play, and what did you do to achieve a common goal? These are all really standard interview questions that get trotted out for every HR department, for every company under the sun. So I tend to take the view with these that you can really prepare yourself well if you familiarise yourself with that particular firm and look at the job spec, look at their bump and blurb about the people that they're looking for, their person spec and profile, all the information you get for the role, but then also look at the company, really get under the hood of it. If you're applying to a firm that's got 3 initials and you can't tell me what the name of the partners are, that shows me a lack of interest. So it's making sure that you know everything backwards. And once you revise that, it becomes really easy to speak with confidence because you know the answer. So that comes across as well. You know, by being that well prepared, you give a very short, succinct answer, exactly to the point, ticks all the boxes, and at the end of the interview they go, "Oh, that was a good answer to that. 5 out of 5." And before you know it, you're in the top 3. No matter what your CV says, your interview strength will quite often pull you through.
Great idea. Okay, Egbe, any more?
I mean, Stuart was brilliant. So just to add to that, I mean, this is what we've seen with our students. I mean, so I'm going to keep it really simple. If you are interviewing or you're doing an application form and you can swap out the names of the firm and that answer, you could use the same answer for that particular firm, then your answer is not detailed enough. You, in your interview or in your application form, your answer should be so tailored that you can't then just go to Linklaters or go to BA and use the same answer. It's got to be that tailored. And if you're not at that standard, then your chances of going through to the next round are very slim. So, for example, we had students this year who would go in there and say, you know, when the firm would ask them in interview, you know, why have you chosen our firm? And they would say something like, oh, you know, the firm, you know, is big on social mobility, and they have a strong commercial practice or a global law firm, compared to another student who was like, you know, John Smith recently did a deal for 80 million with a Chinese counterpart and concerning AI. And this shows, you know, the ability of the firm to be able to drive forward innovative solutions in AI. 2 very completely different answers, but you can see that one probably has done some research and the other is probably just copying and pasting. So if you really want to work for a firm, just as Stuart has said, see it as a full-time job. You've got to do that research. Look at LinkedIn. What are the partners doing? What deals have they done recently? Go on Legal Cheek. What are they talking about in terms of recent projects or you know, initiatives that that firm or in-house organization might be doing? And if you're not sure, then you haven't done enough research. That's what I would say. There we go.
Very helpful. Thank you. So we did have a couple of questions about how do people know the right practice area that they want to go into. And the more I talk to different lawyers and solicitors, the more I find out that they've mostly had squiggly career paths. I don't know if that's fair to say, but yeah, I mean, Charlotte, how did you know that you wanted to work in-house? What point did you work out that was for you, or that particular area of practice in-house as well?
Yeah, so when I went to university originally, my ambition was to work in media law and to do defamation and reputation management, those sorts of cases. So that was actually my original aspiration, and I studied media law on my degree. Then when I left university, that field is just so niche to get into and so difficult. So I essentially fell into employment law. When I worked into the discrimination department, we covered both civil litigation and employment law. And it was whilst I was there that I really developed an interest in the employment side. And the more I found out about it, the more interested I became. And then I was looking for roles in employment law specifically and stumbled across the in-house role. But then when I joined in-house, I guess what I enjoyed about it, being able to compare the two, working in a law firm and working in-house, was it feels that in-house you can see the impact of the work. So the things that you're advising on, you can see what happens with that, whereas a lawyer in a private practice firm will probably advise you on quite a small discrete point and then never find out what happens with that advice they provide. So that's one of the key differences. I think there's a misconception that in-house lawyers don't work as hard, which isn't true, because we're with our clients all day, every day. They can just pop into our office. And I think when I was on my training contract, one of the things I advised my counterparts to do who were training as well was to sign up for like Lexology updates. And even if you sign up for all areas of law, at some point you will realize you are naturally more inclined to read updates for certain practice areas. So then I would probably focus on that area. So when I went into my training contract, I knew at that point that I wanted to do employment law, but I got an opportunity also to do the media law and the reputation management. And actually, when I did it in practice, it was quite a lot different. You know, they're not all Agatha Christie cases. Some of them are, you know, someone on a golf course who makes a comment about someone, and it felt quite petty, for want of a better word, in comparison to what I've been doing. So what you think you're interested in originally might change over time. So I guess being open-minded, but also having an awareness of what does interest you naturally, because like I mentioned earlier, my training contract applications at uni were all for corporate firms, but actually I didn't have a real interest in that. So if I could go back in time, I probably would have focused more on employment specific opportunities, or specifically in-house ones.
That's interesting. Stuart, you gave us a little bit of a journey that you went through as well. So you ended up in an area of law that you hadn't envisaged to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I studied contract law at undergrad, I found it really dry and boring, and I hated it. And now, as a commercial litigation lawyer, 90% of my casework is surrounding contracts or quasi-contractual arrangements. But I think that's the difference. Is I found it more interesting when it was applied to a problem than it was learning about it in isolation. I suppose one of the biggest things to get decided early on is whether you are a contentious or a non-contentious lawyer, because I think you do tend to fall into one or the other camp. Very rarely do you find anybody who's happy with both. And I found transactional work just didn't engage me. The thought of cramming a defence through the fax machine at 10 to 4 when the deadline was 4 o'clock to get it to court, when we used to use fax machines, was the kind of excitement that I liked in litigation. And other people will be sitting there thinking, do you know what? If for whatever reason it didn't get there by 4 o'clock and you were negligent and the client can claim £250,000 off you for doing that, that would scare the life out of me. No, thank you. You know, so it's personality types will gravitate to one or the other. And I think before you narrow down what specific area you want to practice in terms of the subject matter, perhaps have a think about whether or not you are the kind of person who enjoys that pressure. You know, I can't go through a day now without wanting to work towards some sort of deadline or prepare a case or have a well-constructed argument or what have you. Whereas other people, they hate the pressure of that. They hate the constant deadlines. They'd much rather do the transaction where they can apply all of their skills in a methodical fashion in a more collaborative setting rather than an adversarial one to get the deal done. So once you kind of suss out that, you can then start to narrow down what area you want to go into. Some of you will be natural arguers, and others will be be far better at collaborating with people. But figure out which camp you're in first, and then work out the specific area from there, I think.
Interesting, that's helpful. Anyway, we've got a question about whether you should be doing modules in your undergrad, I guess your LLB or your LLM. I guess we offer some modules in our LLM in particular areas of law to help you get into those areas of law, whether it makes that much difference, whether it can give you an advantage.
Advantage. I think it's helpful from the sense that you, at least from a theoretical perspective, are able to understand particular concepts in a particular area. So I'll take my area, which is commercial. You know, it does help to kind of understand, how, what a shareholder agreement is, or what's this typical deal cycle of a merger and acquisition. That's all helpful and can kind of get you, it gives you a flavor as to whether or not something like that is going to be something that a route that you want to go down. So I think that's helpful. In terms of advantage in the job market, I'm yet to be convinced, I'll be honest, because I've seen people who have done French law, French degrees with no law and have gone into IP or whatever it is. So I don't think it puts you at advantage, but I think it helps you to decide whether or not that is an area of law that you want to pursue.
Yeah, thank you. So we had quite a lot of questions from international students or international lawyers, and I think some of us are first to admit we're probably not experts on this one. But if you are based outside the UK, has the panel got any particular advice or resources for those that are international? Stuart?
Well, it's a really tough one because it's not anything I've really experienced myself. I think getting experience and stuff can be difficult if you are internationally based and you're looking for experience within a law firm in England and Wales. Obviously, being physically present is going to give you an advantage. Even in this day and age when people are dispersed as law firms and they're quite happy for people to work remotely, I think they still want to see you in and around the office quite a bit. And I would say, to be fair, don't underestimate the amount of experience you can gather just by being in the same room as lawyers doing the job that you want to do, because you'll overhear a telephone conversation, you'll hear a way that something's explained to a client or something, and you'll think, oh my God, they've summed it up in 2 sentences where I would stumble over a paragraph to explain that. I'm remembering that and using it. So there's a lot of that kind of happens by osmosis. But in terms of the processes for applications and the particular things that international students face, I'm really sorry that I've got nothing to offer in terms of help through those particular processes. And I would suggest perhaps seeing what there is available with the law societies that are local to your particular nation, and seeing if there are routes to cross-qualification or routes in or links with England and Wales, to see if there's a well-trodden path that you can look to follow, perhaps, and use that as an example to work from.
Yeah, I think there are certainly international associations, aren't there? Either kind of over here of international kind of lawyers who are now based over here, or vice versa. There are definitely growing networks. That's my kind of instinct on those. Charlotte, sorry.
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I think the value of obtaining the work experience in your home nation, if you're not able to obtain kind of right to work permits in the UK at this current stage, because you might need sponsorship to do that. But there's a huge value in obtaining any work experience and then having separately an understanding of the UK scheme. But in my own legal career, and I'm junior in it, I have come across quite a few different lawyers who have qualified in different jurisdictions and then cross-qualified, so that there is a value in that. And also the remote opportunities. So I think on Row mentoring, I know there's opportunities to filter mentors by being LGBT plus or certain ethnic minority backgrounds. So it might be that there's someone as part of those mentoring programs that has cross-qualified, and you can reach out to someone who has that specific experience. So I think it is very helpful to have role models. So when the reason that I did do things like this was because when I transitioned, I didn't have any role models at a junior level. So I think it's important to raise that awareness and profile, that just because you do come from a different or non-conventional background, that you still can have those opportunities available to you.
Yeah, and I feel like it is quite international. I know it's not in every firm and every sector, but we've had a lot of international students studying with us. The number of exemptions for SQE, particularly SQE2, just take SQE1 if you're a qualified lawyer, quite often are growing and growing, and the number of countries it's growing and growing. So it feels quite international. I don't know if that's the case, Egbe, in terms of people both coming over here who are interested in practicing over here and vice versa.
Yeah, I think it's growing hugely, and I think law firms and in-house organizations are now recognizing that. I think one of the important things is, I know that I was hoping that you'd come to me last because I was trying to find the name of the organization. It's called Global Access, but this is for international students who are looking to get involved in the commercial area. What they do is they help international students with their commercial law application. So if you're an international student that wants to go to these slightly bigger law firms, they have a track record of helping people to get into those firms. So maybe check that out if you're in the commercial sector. If you're not and you're kind of looking to be in other sectors, then definitely look at your careers section in your whatever school you're attached to, because they have been through this before, will have had international students for the last couple of decades. So they will have routes to qualify and opportunities that you might not see just in your own search. So I would definitely also start there as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I was just going to invite any other questions from those on the webinar. Please pop them in the chat. We've got about 15 minutes. So I really love to have any questions from you specifically for the panel as we're coming through towards the end. I think probably the last bit here really is about what the responsibilities could be of organisations to help some of these students, aspiring lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds, from those backgrounds where perhaps they haven't got that that network, and how the firms and the organisations can actually play a role in helping make sure that they succeed in the profession as well. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I have seen a shift from when even I graduated, which was approaching 10 years ago, to now in terms of the university requirements. I think now as law firms we are more aware of the social issues, and actually because you got a 2-2 there might have been socio-economic factors linked to that, childcare, working full-time. There's a lot of factors that can actually impact the grade you get, and actually getting a 2-1 is not always representative of your work ethic or your talent. So yeah, and myself being from a working class background, my mum was a hairdresser, my dad sold carpets, so I didn't have those networks, and that's why I had to find ways to get them myself, whether I was part of a group whilst I was at uni, and the name slips my mind now, but I will send it to you, Alice, to share when I find it. But they did kind of monthly sessions for people from lower socio-economic backgrounds, where we would talk about things like a particular deal from a particular commercial law firm and consider cultural factors and things that I just never would have thought of, and they did help improve in my applications, because actually I had a new perspective from someone in a professional background, which I never would have had before. And also looking at networking opportunities with LGBT plus lawyers and other people similar to myself was really helpful as well.
Thank you. Stuart?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more awareness of the benefits now than there ever was before of having a more diverse workforce. And a lot of the work that we did at MW was realizing that actually a lot of the time lawyers want to serve the communities that they are linked to. So we did quite a lot around looking at people's, when we were looking to recruit, certainly at higher level, for example, looking at what what's the word I'm looking for? What leverage people could put on their networking serving that area. So if we're in a certain borough of London, for example, we're looking to recruit somebody, we would say, okay, well, there's a large demographic there that is Arabic speaking, so we might look to prefer an Arabic speaking lawyer in that particular practice area. We're quite big on things like conveyancing is a really good example. It doesn't matter what your cultural background is or the particular characteristics you've got, chances are that there's a large proportion within any demographic that will be looking to purchase a house or sell a house at some point. So having as many languages, as many cultural backgrounds, as many points of access that understood the different things, Muslim finance and things like that that were particular to certain sectors, was really helpful in demonstrating how that benefits everybody, because somebody can come into us and say, okay, English isn't my first language. Do you have anybody who speaks Italian? Because I'm an Italian national who now lives over here. And we say, yeah, we got one of those. Doesn't do your practice area, but we'll sit in any meeting with the lawyer who is doing it and offer the translation for you for nothing. And that really, really helps. And there's just a couple of examples there about how it's becoming more prevalent, and a lot of firms are really leaning into it. So yeah, really, really play to that and use what you can do to get the support from the firms that are running those kind of programs to reach out to those. A lot of them do it at grassroots level. Even a lot of early talent teams are going into schools in certain areas of the cities that they're affiliated to, and trying to draw as many people from grassroots as possible to have an interest in the profession. I think The problem we're experiencing in Bristol certainly is that at school level, it's still breaking through that perception where a lot of people from those backgrounds still perceive that they don't have a chance of getting into the profession. And it's kind of saying to them, look, there's a couple of us here from council estates who've done it. I'm sure you can as well. If you graft as hard as you can do it just as well as someone who's flown through a red brick university and never had to work a day in their life because they've got plenty of money to fall back on in the family. It's breaking through those barriers and trying to draw people. So yeah, lean into it, look for those things that are going on. And if you are from the kind of less traditional background that goes into law, don't lose heart with it. Look for ways that support is being offered to people like you, and really go out of your way to find those and use them because they will really help.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think from a diversity perspective in our team, you don't know quite how much input and insight people with that lived experience or from that particular community can give you until they're sitting in that conversation with you and go, but this is how I find that, and this is how I've experienced that. And I think, I mean, I've had kind of 2 Muslim colleagues in my team, and they've just given me so much more insight and understanding into all sorts of depth. I think it's the depth of kind of cultural practices, of the religion, so much more insight than I would be able to read or see, or however much I'd be interested in or trained, to understand. Really, by far the best way of really understanding it. And colleagues from the LGBT plus community in our team as well, where they've really been able to help us add a lot more to our practice and improve our student experience, improve our recruitment as well. So, but that can't happen unless you're actually having those engaged conversations and actually experiencing it firsthand, can it?
No, and I think as well, so one thing that I would always do when I applied for training contracts is look on the websites to what people are doing in terms of diversity, and try and look into that in detail, because it's hard to know whether you'll feel comfortable working somewhere and feel that you're accepted without actually being within it or speaking to someone. So the next best thing you can do is look at, is this company just changing their flag for Pride Month, or are they actually doing specific events and creating opportunities for people from an LGBT plus background, for example?
Yeah, thank you.
And then you can find on the website quite often if there's people that are head of those committees. So if you've got a rep in the firm that is the sort of head of that committee, then you can quite often dig around, find that information. You can connect with them on LinkedIn. You can say to them, look, I'm making an application to your firm. I identify as this. I see that you're part of that particular committee, and I just wondered if I could get 2 minutes of your time on the phone to discuss how you find the atmosphere before I make the application. And then when you do get into the interview, you can say, well, I actually reached out to so-and-so to talk about their experiences. They spoke very highly about their experiences as a gay lawyer in your practice, and that really encouraged me to apply. Well, that shows, that ticks so many boxes, initiative, the fact that you're prepared to look into it, the confidence that it takes to reach out to somebody and have that discussion. So, you can quite often, building on what Charlotte said, sort of what I was saying about the buzzwords application, you can find the details on the internet and you can actually dig around a little bit and get to the bottom of it and find out more, to lean into that a lot more.
Thank you. Egbe, final thoughts wearing through your mind as you're listening to others?
I mean, I think both Charlotte and Stuart have really covered it, to be honest. I mean, I would just say, similar to what they're saying, it's such a thing right now that law firms and organizations want to have as much of a diverse team as possible, not just at the start, so where you would all be applying to, but throughout their ranks. And they're only going to get that if they have early talent that reflects their clients or their stakeholders. So I would just say to you, keep the faith. I know law is not easy and you have to be very resilient, but there are programs. If you're from an underrepresented group, then there are programs and insight days and mentoring and all sorts of different schemes out there for you. So just don't lose hope, because otherwise, if people like you are not going into the legal sphere, then nothing's going to change, which is not what we want. So please do be resilient as much as you can.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you everyone for giving me your time this evening, away from family, work, personal commitments as well. So thank you. Has anyone else got anything to add that they wish to share with the people listening, or have we covered
Can
most
I
of your
just add,
views?
yeah, about allyship? So even if you're
course.
not from a diverse background, it's so important to understand the issues that people are facing, because your client might be from a diverse background, your boss might be. And I think understanding those issues is actually really valuable. And for me, one thing, if I'm joining a new meeting or meeting someone new, I think, am I going to feel comfortable with this person? So if you can somehow show someone that you understand some of the struggles that they face, or issues they might come across, and that's really helpful as well. And ultimately, people want to work with people that they're comfortable with.
Absolutely, thank you. Right, well, thank you everyone. We will pop a few of those resources and links to organisations we've mentioned in an email to everyone who's registered. So yeah, please, panelists, send those over to me, and I'll send that out in a couple of days' time. All right.
Oh,
But yeah,
Upreach,
thank you.
that was the organisation.
What was it called?
Upreach.
Upreach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
I'll
go
make
to.
note of that one. Upreach. And then I realise there are probably lots of questions that I haven't answered, that people submitted. There were quite a lot specifically about the SQE and passing the SQE and qualifying work experience. So the college has a whole lot of resources on all of that and other events on that. We've got one on SQE pathways on the 13th of June. So if people are interested in more in the SQE, then yeah, please visit our website, because we can help you definitely with that. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.